Hey shredding fans, I'm back, which means Shredding for Gold podcast is back as well. First off, just want to say thank you for all who are listening into this episode and this podcast. If you're new here, my name is Emily Trepanier. I am the host of Shredding for Gold podcast, and this is going to be episode 14 of the Shredding for Gold podcast. So if you're new here, feel free to check out the podcast's website at www.shreddingforgold.com. On that website, you can find a little bit more about what this podcast is about. You can also listen to all the previous episodes and this episode as well. And you can also subscribe so that you never miss an episode. When a new one comes out, you'll get notified. Also, be sure to leave a rating and review the podcast so we know how we're doing. And so if we need to change anything, or if you like what you hear on the show, let us know. We love to hear from you. Also, if you have an assistant such as like Google or Alexa or anyone else, you can always ask your assistant to play the Shredding for Gold podcast and they'll play it for you. We're on Apple Podcasts, we're on Google Podcasts, we're on Spotify now. That's just a new one that we just got onto. And so, yeah, we're in multiple places for you to check out the podcast and listen to. So feel free to listen. And remember, rate, review, and subscribe to the Shredding for Gold podcast. So, yeah, episode 14 of the Shredding for Gold podcast. Here we are. I hope you guys have been enjoying whatever you have been doing lately. For me, it has been busy and very exciting because it is the winter season, and so I am back on snow, training hard and having lots of fun and working hard. So this episode we're going to chat about, I thought it would be fun to look at the differences between training on a hill versus training on a mountain, because to believe it or not, there are some differences, and I knew there was going to be some differences, but some of the things I didn't realize until I was actually like full-time training on the mountains. So I thought it would be fun to just dive into that and chat a little bit about some of the differences that I've been experiencing. So that's what this podcast is going to be all about. Before we dive into that, though, I just want to let you know that training is going well. We are meshing nicely with the new team is meshing nicely. I plan to do an episode coming up where I talk more about that. And also we're going to be doing a podcast where I interview my new guide, Isaac. And so you guys will get to meet Isaac. And I'm also hoping that I can do an episode for you guys to meet a few of my coaches that are new to the team. So yeah. That's all coming up in future podcasts, but right now we're going to dive right into the topic at hand, which is hill shredding versus mountain shredding. So obviously the big difference is shredding down a hill versus a mountain. The size is I would say the biggest obvious difference. So in Ontario, I trained on hills, so they were smaller, still great hills to train on, but definitely on a smaller scale training on. Out west here, it's mountain training, so think of a hill, but double the size or triple the size, or in some cases like quadruple the size, and in some cases more. So yeah, size difference, definitely a difference. Which one do I prefer more? Well, honestly, they both have positives and negatives. I wouldn't be able to say which one I like more. I honestly wouldn't be able to say. I think if I had to like absolutely choose, I'd probably say I like the mountains a little bit more, only for the simple fact that there's more like terrain. It's longer. The runs are longer. But honestly, riding on hills, like training and riding on hills back in Ontario, that was fun too. And that's where I began. So it was amazing, right? So training on mountains just is like a whole new level of training, right? So they both are great. I'm not going to say I haven't liked either of them, because honestly, they're both great. So I can't really fully decide, but if I had to choose one, I'd probably say mountains. And I don't know, like they're both great. But so yeah, major difference right off the bat, I would say size. That is a major difference. Another major difference that that may not possibly be as noticeable on a hill versus a mountain is the amount of area, and on like the hill versus the mountain that you can ride on. So on a hill, you do have different areas of the hill, so you can go down the one side of the hill and go down the other, but it's often like compacted together in like a smaller area. So you don't super notice it. You do notice it, but it's not as noticeable on a hill. Versus on a mountain, it's larger scale, so you can ride down the one side of the mountain and then ride down the next, but often you have to take either a run to get to the other side or a few different chairlifts to get to the other side. And so that's definitely a difference between a hill and a mountain that I'm getting used to. And I mean, I had experience with that before, before I fully started training on mountains, because I had done race camps a few years prior to moving out here on actual mountains. So I had some experience there, but now that I'm exclusively training on a mountain, I'm definitely getting more of that experience now, versus when I was riding on hills and just like going to a few different race camps a year to go to the mountains. That's what we're doing now. So that's been a difference for sure. And so oftentimes to get to the other side of the mountain, it's going down a run and then taking up another chairlift, like a different chairlift to get to the next side, or taking the same chairlift and then going down a different run to get across to the other side, and then taking up a chairlift to get up to the other side of the mountain. So it's a bit more like, I think there's a few more extra steps in order to get like to the other side, versus on a hill you'd go up a chairlift and there'd be like multiple runs around you, and so you could either go one way up the chairlift and get to the one side of the hill and run, or go on like the other way off the chairlift and get to another side of the mountain. So definitely like again, it goes back to the size of the mountain. Hills are going to be smaller scale, and then obviously mountains are going to be higher scale. So that's been a cool difference to play, to learn more about. And my next point, I'm gonna wait until a little bit more until I describe a few things more before I go back to this point. But we'll get there. So another difference between hill riding and mountain riding is the importance of what's called a blocker. So because I am legally blind and riding down a mountain at nearly 30 kilometers per hour, sometimes in some cases more and some cases less. So I do have a guide that's always with me when I'm snowboarding down the mountain. And then something else, because it's a mountain, and they call them blockers. So on the hill, it was a bit of a consideration to have a blocker, but we could get away without having a blocker because, again, smaller scale, and the runs, it was smaller scale versus on a mountain, which is larger. All comes back to size, folks. But on the mountain, it's become very apparent the importance of having a blocker. So you're probably wondering, what in the world is a blocker? Well, I'm about to tell you this. But first, before I tell you, I have to tell you. So I have a guide who's always with me going down the hill. And basically, the guide is in charge of making sure I get safely down the hill by communicating with me and giving me specific verbal instructions so that I can ride safely and I know where I am on the hill and how to get down the hill. So the guide is basically, think of the guide as my eyes. So the guide is basically my eyes getting down the mountain. Without a guide, it would just be me, and well, that would probably turn out very bad, especially I'd probably land in a tree or fall off a fence, fall through a fence or fall off a cliff. So yeah, you don't want to have a rogue blind snowboarder going down the mountain on their own, because that's just not safe, and that would not be good. So yeah, the guide is in charge of being my eyes. So it's totally up, I rely heavily on my guide to make sure that I'm staying safe and getting down the mountain, the run safely. So that's what a guide is. The coach oversees the racing, all my training and stuff. So they will give tips, they will give tricks, they'll give things that we can work on, and then it's up to my guide and I to work out what they're telling me, and so that we can replicate it on the mountain. So they're kind of if you will, supervisors for the race, supervisors for us athletes. They're not, I don't know, I'm not sure if I exactly call them supervisors, but they're kind of like that. They're kind of in charge of overseeing all of my training and stuff. So, and then blockers, amazing, fearless people that the blockers are. So the blockers are basically, they're another safety for me as I'm riding down the mountains. Because the mountain is such a large place, and you can there'll be people coming out of multiple different areas and ways and stuff. So because my guide has to be so super focused on making sure I get down the run safely, it's very hard for the guide to not only guide me down the mountain, but also be watching out for people who fly past me or who are about to nearly run into me. Obviously, my guides are watching out for that, but ultimately it's the blocker. That's the blocker who is, because the blocker isn't guiding me. They're solely focused on keeping distance between myself and others around me. So that's kind of the blocker's job. And so if someone does come really close to me, they will intercept that person and block them or block me, so that it's like a person in between myself and whoever is about to potentially run into me. So blockers, we definitely use them on the hill, especially when I was first starting out as a snowboarder. When I first started out snowboarding, I definitely preferred having two people on snow with me while we were going down the hills. As I started to improve and advance in my snowboarding, although I still preferred having two people going down the hill with me, it wasn't a major issue having only one person with me. Obviously, the preference would be to have two, but definitely sometimes we would ride with only one, like myself and my guide would only ride down the hills. But on the mountains, there's a definite need to have blockers, because again, going back to the large scale of the mountain versus the hill, there's so many places where people can come out of that it's just could potentially go south rather quickly. So very thankful to have blockers with us. Sometimes we have one blocker with us, sometimes we have two. Just depends. And definitely my blockers are fearless people who are there making sure and helping make sure that I stay safe down the hill while I'm flying down the hill at the speed of light. So big shout out to my guides, coaches, and my blockers for tag teaming and making sure that I'm staying safe on the mountains. And apologies if I give you guys a bit of heart attacks on and off. It just comes with coaching a blind athlete. But yeah, so that's another big difference between hill riding and mountain riding, is the need to have a blocker on a mountain is definitely a difference between hill riding that I've experienced thus far. Another difference, the weather plays a big role. It played a role on the hills for sure, but it's played I guess it's a similar role on the mountains, but in a bigger scale. So, because we are training in the mountains, we're actually in the mountains training, weather in the mainland is and can be different than weather in the mountains. So sometimes if it's cloudy in the mainland, you have to be really cognizant about if it's going to be how low the clouds are going to be in the mountains and if there's going to be any fog, because there's going to be lower clouds and fog. It's going to be harder for my guide to be able to see properly enough to guide me safely down the mountain. So that's something that I've discovered with mountain riding versus hill riding. We would on the hills, like we would ride on the hills, we would ride through snowstorms sometimes, and like I think it was because it's like such a smaller scale. Again, it didn't appear to be an issue from the guides, but again, this was a smaller scale, and this was I don't think it ever got as foggy as it does on the mountains. I'm sure it did get foggy on the hills, but I don't think it's like the same amount of fogginess that you would find on a mountain versus a hill. So that's the weather is definitely something that we are watching even more closely on the mountains. I mean, we watched it closely on the hills as well. I mean, we wouldn't go out there if it was raining or whatever, because then the hill would be like an ice hill of death. But yeah, we definitely did watch the weather on the hills, but it's definitely like super important to be watching the weather on the mountains, especially if it's like forecasted to be a cloudy day. Then you have to really make sure that if it's going to be cloudy, will you be able to see? Sometimes it's fine, sometimes it's fine, but if there's like any sort of like fog that could roll in, that could potentially be a bit of a safety issue. So, the weather is definitely something we are constantly watching, and we've had a little bit of bad luck with weather on Thursday nights, just because it's been foggy. However, we have had some great weather on Saturdays. Sometimes it has gotten a bit foggy on Saturdays, but I mean, we just sort of like take it a little bit slower, and then we're constantly checking in with each other to like, because obviously the fog doesn't really like matter to me because I don't see anyways, but it's important that if my guide can see, then we definitely will like stop or slow down or take a little break on the side of the mountain until visibility has improved, so that he can get us safely down the runs. Because I'm not sure how leading the blind would work going down a mountain at speeds when it's like super foggy. So, I mean, sure, we can make it work, but it's probably not an ideal and safe situation. So, yeah, weather is definitely something that we have to take a little bit more into consideration when riding down mountains. We did definitely on the hill, as I said, but it's definitely more of a consideration riding on a mountain. Another difference between riding on hills and mountains is that there are more like obstacles and hazards that I can run into or fall over on a mountain versus a hill. Definitely obstacles on hills, such as like trailer poles and fences and trees. But on a mountain, a new obstacle that we've discovered, and I had I had a bit of an intro, like an introduction to them, going to a few of my race camps, but cliffs. Believe it or not, there are cliffs on mountains, and there are some places where there's no fences and there's like a cliff on the one side. So if I were to go one side of the hill too much, one side of the run too much, sorry, it's not a hill, it's not a mountain, I could potentially be careening down a cliffside, which, let's be honest, that would not be good. It'd be very painful. So that's definitely a consideration. And another big difference between hill riding and mountain riding that we've been working on. So, but we have been working on my like small, tighter turns, so like I can ride through narrow areas. And so we have actually been riding around where there are cliff edges. And so I've given my guides and coaches and blockers a few heart attacks because I've almost fallen off the cliff a few times. However, it's improving it's improving, like it's getting better, less heart attacks, getting to know, learning some new techniques to help ride through narrow areas, and making sure that I'm not like skidding out and causing, and accidentally doing some unplanned cliff diving. So we've been working on like my narrow turns so that I can ride in narrow areas. We've also started working on updating my falling. So for, especially in like narrow areas, to figure out like best ways to fall in those areas. So we definitely like have been working on that, and then just like working out some communication to help work through that, to help work through getting through the narrow areas, because it's definitely like definitely a little bit nerve-wracking, like going through the narrow areas, but I have like my guide is always there, and then we also have the blockers. So as we've sort of gotten to know each other, and my guide has learned my the way that I ride, he's able to correct and redirect more and more. So he kind of knows what to watch out for, and he knows what he's getting to know what he can do to help like support me during those times where it is a little bit more challenging and a bit more narrow. So and then we also have, and now that we know that, say for example when we're going through narrow areas, we will tell like the blockers where to like position themselves and what they can do to help support me getting through the narrow areas. So but I'm happy to report that we are definitely getting him, like we're definitely seeing lots of great improvements riding through the narrow areas, and it really has forced me to like make smaller, tighter turns. So it's a win-win situation, honestly, and because those narrow turns will be important for races and stuff. They'll be super important. So very excited. It's definitely like there's definitely nerves like in narrow areas, but I'm very proud and very happy that we're doing this, so I can continue to improve as a snowboarder and a race, and can improve my racing skills as well, because those skills that I'm learning, even though it might not seem like it, will be like super important as I continue training towards my ultimate goal of getting to the Paralympics. So very proud. So yeah, that I would say are like the major differences between hill riding and mountain riding. I'm sure I haven't mentioned all of them, but honestly those are like the major differences that I've noticed thus far, and I'll keep you guys updated on other things that I've noticed as I continue training on the mountains, because yeah, there's definitely differences, and it's cool, it's great. It's honestly fun to be riding on the mountains, and it honestly was fun to ride on the hills as well. Brand new adventures. There's lots of brand new adventures riding on the mountain, but it's been fun, super fun, and I'm so happy that I'm riding on the mountains and just back to riding and like race training and everything, because I definitely missed that. And yeah, so before I end off this episode, I want to say a huge thank you to a few fellow podcasters who had me on their podcast recently. So big thank you to Justin from the Disenabled podcast, who had me on his show. We got to chat a lot about just like my goal and my adventures as I continue to work towards the Paralympics. So we will definitely link that episode to the Disenabled podcast for you guys to check out and listen and subscribe to. So and it sounds like it's going to be a 3-part podcast because we had a really great chat. And so the first part of my episode on his podcast is out, so we will link that down in the podcast show notes so that you guys can take a listen. And also a big shout out to Robert, who had Darling and I on his podcast, The Relaxed Dog, to talk about all things Darling. And so that was really fun to chat with Robert, and we will definitely link that podcast down below as well. So in that episode, I introduced Darling and who Darling was and how we got to know each other and how Darling helps me. So we'll get that posted as well. And so big shout outs to Justin again from the Disenabled podcast and Robert from the Relaxed Dog podcast who had us on both of your podcasts. Thank you guys. And also another shout out, I think I mentioned him before, but another shout out to my friends Brian and Carrie Kajewski for helping set up helping me set up and get my name out there to get on some of the recent podcasts that I've been on so far. So, so we're going to end it off here, folks. Feel free to check out the Team Starfish website as well, www.teamstarfish.ca, to follow my adventure as we continue working towards the Paralympics. Currently working on a big update for the website, so look forward to that coming very soon. I'm just doing some finishing touches, and then it'll be released. That's all for this week, folks. We'll be back. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed episode 14. We'll shred you later.